I didn't get to make a quarter zip joke. You know about the big quarter zip movement that's happening?
That young black men,
yeah,
right?
You're up on
Why
that?
do you think? Yeah.
I
Why do you think Why do you think I'm here?
I'm elegant. I'm classy.
That's not why I wear quarter zips a lot. This is 2 degrees more casual than interviewing Amy Coney Barrett, and 1 degree more casual than my normal hosting show. That was the choice.
You'll be wearing a Toby Keith t-shirt next time.
Yeah, when I'm unemployed. That's right.
Welcome to the New York Times Popcast. You are interrupting my pardon of weekly cultural review. I'm John Caramanica, and I'm the critic.
I'm Joe Coscarelli, and I'm the reporter.
It's a special episode today. Big theme conversation, big ideas. We had a big thought. You and I were texting a couple weeks ago. Sydney Sweeney, the memes, the discourse, sending tweets back and forth. Can a celebrity be conservative? This is something that we talk about and we allude to a lot on this show. And I think we determined that it was time for a real episode on the topic.
This is something that I think has threaded through a lot of our thoughts and coverage for the last couple of years. This has been a moment in which pop culture is changing a lot. The center of what I think the American mainstream has moved in alignment with the current presidential administration. And there was basically one person we wanted to chat with about this.
Literally just one.
And he happened to reside professionally in the same building as us. Ross Douthat is here on Popcast. Ross is the host of Interesting Times with Ross Douthat. Ross is a opinion columnist at the New York Times.
You guys needed to know if a celebrity could be a conservative.
Yes.
And here we are.
And here I am.
That's our show. That's our show. That's the show. It's great.
Yeah.
We're over it.
This is a crossover episode in multiple senses.
Like a Marvel team up, kind of.
Yes.
I think
Flintstones meet the Jetsons. That's my go-to.
Yep.
I think
I'm the Flintstone.
I was going to say you're the Jetsons.
I was going to say that's a pretty laden comparison.
Yeah.
I was not going to go
with
there.
Decide by the end.
Okay.
But Ross, we've been on parallel journeys, not only as New York Times employees, but as video podcasting experimenters. Ross has a YouTube channel. We have a YouTube channel. Subscribe to both.
Oral culture.
Yes.
It's here.
Yes.
It's here to stay.
We're thinking of this as a conversation among colleagues, among people with slightly different vantages, but you are a pop culture consumer. We want to touch on Hollywood, but also the way that MAGA and the current Trump administration and conservatism more generally are weaving their way through music, country, and rap in particular have embraced this era of politics.
Dare we say leveraging the moral fluidity of some of these cultural spaces.
The Taylor Swift album has been a lightning rod for conversation about conservatism, small c, I would say, that you've covered on your show.
But I'm also a conservative dad, which means I'm not that appreciative of the new album's coarseness.
I think people who might know you from you have a column this weekend about Trump's polling numbers, right? That's a very different thing than the column you wrote a couple weeks ago about Sydney Sweeney's viability as a movie star. Mm-hmm. So where do you sit? Where do you sit in this?
I mean, to the extent that I have any background, I've always been a movie guy, and as TV transformed and became more movie-like, and the movies went into a kind of decline, I became more of a TV guy. I'm less of a pop music guy, except for Taylor Swift and other things that my daughters listen to. So my opinions on that subject are maybe slightly narrower. And then, probably for 10 years or so in this job, I've tried to work in a fair amount of cultural writing.
And you had Tony Gilroy on the show recently.
I had Tony on the podcast, but yeah, I had Tony Gilroy on to talk about Andor as a left-wing show, but also a left-wing show that conservatives really like, that is not seen as didactic. He didn't want to say that Andor was a left-wing show.
You were pushing over and over.
He really didn't want to say that for understandable reasons. But then he also wanted to say that, well, if by left-wing you just mean it's on the side of peace, truth, and understanding, then how could anyone?
I don't think it's left or right at all.
Anyway, he hit you with the Republicans watch TV too line.
Well,
that part was implied.
There's sort of a two-step of universal storytelling. I'm not political on the one hand, and artists are left-wing because that's
Because
natural.
duh.
Because duh, right? Yeah.
Which is, I think, what we're here to trouble a little bit today. Also, I think maybe even before Sydney Sweeney, there was that news article you sent me last night about Trump trying to force, is it Warner, to relaunch the Rush Hour?
Which may
Rush
soon
Hour
be Warner.
franchise.
Bring back buddy comedy.
Yeah.
Right.
Not just any buddy comedy, but
Right.
specifically Rush Hour and the Rush Hour series.
Occasionally racially fraught buddy comedy series.
Directed by the canceled, disgraced director Brett Ratner, who just so happens to have recently completed an Amazon documentary about Melania Trump.
So that's the circle.
That's the
so
backstory.
Brett Ratner thinks my ticket back to Hollywood is someone
It's through
rebooting Rush
Mar-a-Lago.
Hour.
Well, it's through Mar-a-Lago.
But when you see a news report like that about Trump wanting to sort of reach back to the 80s and 90s pop culture that is most familiar and comforting to him, the other proper noun in this Semaphore story was Bloodsport, the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. Where do you see the relationship between the Trump administration and conservatism more broadly and Hollywood at this moment of transition?
The first thing that you could say that happened in the last 5 years is that you had this moment of kind of maximal cultural consolidation. And it felt for a little while like you could have a world where most important culture was filtered through a small group of studios, a small group of tech companies. There would be a sort of Silicon Valley, Hollywood arrangement. And this sort of, I think, mapped onto a world where everyone seemed to be on the same couple of social media platforms. I think what we talk about as wokeness, right, as that kind of moment was in a way an attempt to sort of use that consolidation and say, all right, and through this sort of consolidated environment, we're also going to have an enlightened party line that people are going to agree on and further and push, and people's behavior and, mores and so on should conform to this as well. And if not, they'll be eased out or canceled. And I think everything we have right now is a reaction to that sort of normal political cultural reaction where people got tired of it and said, I feel like we got rid of the old right-wing Puritans and now we've got the left-wing Puritans, and people who would have been on the left in cultural battles in the 1990s suddenly are on the right because they feel like it's to be on the right is to be against scolding and party lines and litmus tests. And you see this obviously like with comedians, especially older, the whole sort of Dave Chappelle, Bill Maher, older generation of sort of left libertarian comedians who suddenly become, are they right wing? Who knows, what does right wing even mean? But that happens at the same time that there's then a kind of further technological shift where that brief moment of consolidation ends and suddenly everything feels totally fragmented again. And this is what I think you see like in the landscape we're in right now, right? But like the video podcasting realm, it seems like anything goes in politics. Like there's no guardrails. You can have, an incredibly popular podcast while announcing that, Emmanuel Macron's wife is really a man and that the Israelis killed Charlie Kirk.
It is time for you to wake up. I don't know who specifically came out and said that Bibi killed Charlie Kirk.
So the guardrails go away. And so I think there's a lot of people who aren't even sure what right wing or left wing exactly means. There's sort of a sort of bunch of outsiderish cultural elements that are sort of right wing, that are in the like mixed martial arts, bro podcasting range. But then it's also, just to end with Sydney Sweeney, right? So the Sydney Sweeney meme that everyone was talking about, where she was asked an incredibly awkward question about alleged white supremacy in her jeans ad.
Yeah, she says, I did a jeans ad.
I did a jeans ad,
I love
right.
jeans.
Have become very swept up in politics. I did a jean ad. It was, I love jeans.
That's less, I think, a statement that like Sydney Sweeney is now a right-wing celebrity, and more a statement of you can be a celebrity without performing progressivism in certain ways. And that is a change.
If you look at the online response
Oh,
to
yes,
that particular
yes.
answer, it's by no means
it was a statement that received other statements in response.
Yes, it is by no means a universal acclamate, like a voice vote of support. Also, just to your point about consolidation and kind of what's happening at the margins, when that Trump story last night, what it immediately made me think of was I spent some time earlier this year going to a few Theo Von shows, like live comedy shows. And one thing that came up at the live shows is he's been working on this movie, some kind of like comedy with David Spade. He's showing the trailer and he kept being like, I don't want studios to touch it. And I think in his, like the implied radicalism of working outside the studio system is aligned with this kind of right-wing freedom, or what we're thinking of as right-wing cultural freedom right now. Now, I'm not sure that I buy Theo Von as right-leaning. I think he's a much more flexible political valence than that. It's a wave to ride, and I think it's a convenient wave to ride.
And I think that's why Sydney Sweeney, as the sort of crux of this conversation, is so interesting, because she's at the intersection of what you guys are describing, this sort of Wild West, and then the old Hollywood system, the idea of movie stars and box office. And Sydney Sweeney has had this very interesting journey from starring in Euphoria, a debauched youth culture show.
Right.
I feel like often elided is her come up in The Handmaid's Tale. Quite, I think plainly left-leaning allegory for the loss of women's rights in a dystopian society. She starred in independent films like Reality, the Reality Winner movie, where she plays a whistleblower.
Her horror movie Immaculate is, let's say, not favorable to the Roman Catholic Church. I think it's fair to say.
So this American Eagle jeans campaign comes out earlier this year, and the New York Times did great reporting on sort of the idea that the backlash was more or less imagined or dreamed up. The left-wing backlash to this ad.
Yeah, do you think it was dreamed up? I don't think it was dreamed up.
I mean, our reporters who parse through where these online conversations start, I think, did a pretty good job laying out the idea that the backlash to the backlash from the right was much, much, much larger and better organized than whatever sort of stray woke 1.0 reactions there were to the ad itself. So I think Sweeney, what she's done is sort of played this game of projecting heterodoxy, projecting, this idea of you don't really know what I think, but I might wink at you sometimes.
My family wears MAGA hats.
My family wears MAGA hats.
Like
I'm a registered Republican. Was reported ahead of the 2024 election that she'd registered as a Republican in Florida. And at least from the people who have come to champion her, they see a fellow traveler. They see somebody who can both fit in this liberal Hollywood system and even do movies that might have that valence. Her latest film, Christie, is about a closeted lesbian boxer. Like all these things that might seem like typical Hollywood ingenue, liberal Hollywood stuff. And then she's complicating that picture. So I think this idea of a mainstream celebrity, a very popular cultural lightning rod, who also is in conversation and maybe even alliance with the dominant political party in America. Like that is scrambling people's brains.
There's a long-standing tradition of a kind of pathetic right-wing search for celebrities who agree with them.
It's been all John Voight for 20 years.
Trump inauguration concert.
And it's just a bunch of online MAGA guys desperate for a white, all-American, blonde person to project their fantasies on, in the way that you had like far-right racists who loved Taylor Swift back in the day.
So you've been on the internet.
We'll get to Taylor. Right. We'll get to Taylor Swift in a minute. But then there's also a weird dynamic, right, where, again, there are things in the culture now that would not have coded as right-wing 20 years ago that code as right-wing. And one of them is just like, intense public heterosexuality. Like which is a very, very weird thing to say, but I think is part of the reality that there's this odd dynamic.
Is there someone else who embodies that? Like
outside of Sydney Sweeney.
outside
Taylor
of Sydney
Swift,
Sweeney.
honestly, is like...
Well, so all right, yeah, we'll just go to Taylor. So Taylor Swift does an album that, where she's like, I'm in love with my boyfriend.
Yep.
I want to get married
and have
to
kids
him
that look
and
like
have
him.
kids with him. I also really enjoy having sex with him outside of the context of wedlock, right? Like not, this is not an actual sort of, evangelical Christian purity ring kind of album, right?
First Jonas Brothers album. We're not doing that.
Right. It is widely interpreted by critics, by people who are disappointed in the turn Taylor has made as this kind of like, if not right wing, at least sort of right moving thing. And I think that's correct. I think that's a correct interpretation in the current cultural moment to be America's most famous female celebrity and sing a bunch of songs that are like pro suburban domesticity and, pro Chad football player fiance with a big reproductive organ is generally, it does code as right wing.
But how much of this is gender though? Because we're talking about Taylor, we're talking about Sydney, we're not talking about Austin Butler, Jacob Elordi. We're not talking about
those guys. Do not have politics, as far as we can tell.
No, of course, but they're not. But no one is ascribing right-leaning politics to their rather conventional expressions of heteronormative sexuality, which obviously we can trouble a bit at the margins. But in essence, is this something that the right or this sort of like formless online quasi community puts on women and female celebrities?
I don't think it's the right putting anything on Taylor Swift. I think I'll give you that there's like a right-wing Sydney Sweeney cheering section, but the reaction to Life of a Showgirl, yes, I made my own video about it, and I contributed. Okay, fine, guilty as charged.
No, I agree. That movement was coming from
her fans, and generally a kind of amorphous left-wing internet that was reacting to this as something that was a little bit too right-wing for comfort. Now, part of that, so the other thing that's happened in our culture that's totally unusual is men and women younger men and women especially are politically polarized to a degree that's never existed before. It was all, when we were young. Not that we're not young, but, when we were younger, right?
Speak for yourself, Ross.
There was a gender gap and women voted slightly more Democratic and so on. But there was not this huge divergence. And that also, I think, has some kind of cultural manifestations where you have these sort of distinct forms now that are seen, like, MMA or, there's the endless wars over video games, right? But sort of video games are sort of coded as young male pop culture, and pop music is coded as young female pop culture. In the old days, you had these, male heartthrobs, but that's not where we are.
I think the Sydney and Taylor example is interesting because it's a lot about art versus commentary. Like what you're saying is that Taylor has made an album in Life of a Showgirl that has been received as, again, small c conservative potentially in its pursuit of heteronormativity. Whereas Sydney Sweeney has generally made, and even as a producer, not as an actress, made projects that fit more in left Hollywood. But as individuals,
but crucially, also with Sydney Sweeney, nobody saw those movies.
I want to get to that because I do think there's business considerations here for both of them, who are not only individuals and personas, but also corporations in and of themselves. But in real life, Taylor has come out against President Trump. She's campaigned for Democrats. here and there. Whereas Sydney Sweeney, insofar as she's made any sort of comments about her own, ideological leanings, are more implied, again, sort of winks and nudges towards a right-leaning base. Chrissy, for instance, the new Sydney Sweeney movie, gigantic bomb, right? So her left-leaning work not connecting with those audiences, her right-leaning fans not rushing out to see her movies.
Well, except so Sweeney, it seems to me, has had, she's, in part, you have to understand her career just in the other context that is part of this, which is just the ongoing collapse of normal Hollywood as a center for the culture, right? So she's doing a bunch of normal Hollywood things in an environment where nothing is selling. Nothing Hollywood is doing is selling successfully, no matter what stars are involved. Our own paper had a story just last week or the week before about the long, her boxing movie was just one of a long list
25
of movies with
losses in a row,
allegedly
basically.
big stars that are doing, $4 million on opening weekend and dying, right? So Sweeney is trying, and that's distinct from Taylor Swift, who's not, whatever else is going on with Taylor Swift, her mainstream way of making money is working.
Yeah.
So Sweeney, I feel like, is sort of in this weird position where she has this incredibly potent stardom as not a model exactly, but as a face of female sexiness, an influencer, whatever else. And then she has a movie career, and I think the two are important to each other. I don't think Sydney Sweeney would just be famous as a supermodel.
It's too short.
I think I'm not making.
Just kidding.
Uh-huh.
I mean,
I have to watch what I say because I'm a serious political journalist. You guys,
we're allowed to make jokes. You're allowed to make jokes. You're on podcast.
It's all one internet, man.
Yeah. That's true. It is. That is true.
But
it's all Theo Von's internet.
But then also, unlike Taylor, right? Like Taylor Swift has a core fan base of women. There are many men who listen to her, myself included, right? But her core fan base is female. Sydney Sweeney's core fan base right now is probably pretty male.
But they're not right. But they're not a ticket buying fan.
They're meme consumers. They're meme consumers.
But then her one genuine hit movie was itself a kind of semi-traditional rom-com with Glenn Powell.
Yep.
Right.
Anyone But You.
So the most heteronormative thing that Sydney Sweeney has done as a Hollywood celebrity is also her biggest success. I also think Euphoria, like her first two TV shows, Euphoria and then her role on White Lotus, where she was sort of an obnoxious, woke adjacent college student, right? One, Euphoria codes as left-wing TV in 1997, and maybe even when it came out. But again, in an environment where conservatism just is like anything that's not wokeness, even Euphoria. And there's all sorts of course, like, Me Too adjacent complaints about that.
And many others. I mean, Sam Levinson, the creator of Euphoria's other work, is often criticized for being anti-woke in
so
certain ways.
I guess all I'm saying is I think Euphoria, White Lotus, and Anyone But You, those are Sweeney's three most successful actual like actress cultural products, and all of them are in some way like not woke. I think
all of which leads me to the central question, which is like, then why can't she just say, I'm a proud conservative?
Yes. Like, why doesn't she lean in? Because really the interview that we're talking about is her deflecting.
And I want to play this. I want to play this clip where she says, essentially, if I wanted you to know what I believed, I would let you know.
I think that when I have an issue that I want to speak about, people will hear.
So again, why can't she just be openly conservative, especially if the traditional structure of Hollywood isn't working for her?
Being an overtly conservative celebrity is still lame. Don't you think?
Lame is be more. Give me a different word than lame.
Let me put it this
Give
way:
me a
the
different
word conservative.
Who are you
is
thinking
lame.
of?
Well, so look at all the people, the ecosystem of celebrities who are now on the right would not describe themselves as on the right. Would they? Like you get Dave Chappelle in this chair, and you say,
okay,
Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K., Bill Maher, the sort of Jerry Seinfeld, like this sort of that group, right? Would any of them say, I'm a Republican now? No, exactly. Nor would, and then like in the, like Theo Von, right? Theo Von, Joe Rogan, like that's a distinctive novel form of, novel kind of celebrity ecosystem.
They hate being labeled. If they have any politics, it's that.
But, and in a way, maybe it's easier
not all
to
of
say,
them were
not all pro-Trump.
Right. But it's easier to say, well, not the comedian, certainly, but like, it might be easier to say I'm pro-Trump than I'm a Republican, or that like that Trump guy, he's got something going on. Trump himself is obviously part of celebrity culture. But I feel like there's an old world where in Hollywood you could be either liberal, left-wing, or apolitical. And there's a newer world where you can be sort of effectively right-wing. But there still isn't a world where celebrities want to say,
But I feel like
I'm a like.
But the dam is going to break. I think the dam. Here's the thing. I think what you're seeing in YouTube culture and that level of celebrity or commentator who becomes celebrity simply by dint of the hundreds of millions of views that they get, they are softening a generation of fans, viewers, listeners to be potentially open-minded to a centrist celebrity. I don't mean politically centrist. I mean structurally industry centrist, to say, I also share these views. It's why that collision, I think, is coming. But I think if it's not Sydney Sweeney who's going to rip the Band-Aid off, I do think somebody else, maybe of the next generation younger, will rip that Band-Aid off and say, yes, I make left-leaning Hollywood product. Yes, I make a cool, quote-unquote, TV show or film, but also my political valences are more complicated.
They can say that. I think it's the explicit identification with
conservatism or republicanism.
Could happen.
I think you're right. But that's why I think that the Trump example is so complicating in this, because he does provide a way for celebrities to be like, I'm cool, but I also ascribe to right-leaning beliefs. And I think you see this in rap music, for instance.
Rap music.
John recently wrote a big piece about NBA YoungBoy, who had, the defining rap tour of this year. He's, the biggest non-mainstream star. He doesn't have songs on the radio. You don't see him on television, but the youth is obsessed with him. His tour is called Make America Slime Again. His tour exists in part because earlier this year he was pardoned by President Trump after pleading guilty to weapons charges. He'd been on house arrest. He'd had a very complicated web of both federal and state charges that he's been broiled in since he was a teenager. And in a music video, we should play a little bit of it for a song XXX. He's performing and background dancers are dancing in front of slime green graffiti that says "All Hail Trump." He says, I'm with him. He's good for the youngins. He throws a shot at Joe Biden, and he was performing for sold out arenas. Again, you mentioned this idea of uncool. Nobody's cooler in America to young people, especially young Black people, young people of color, than NBA YoungBoy. He's not out here saying I'm a Republican or I'm conservative. He's saying, Trump, that's my guy. And I think that there's an interesting question about what happens to Trump-aligned youth culture with the MAGA movement
as it gets
post-Trump. And if it attaches itself to someone, say, like J.D. Vance, which I'm not sure that it does, especially if you're a rapper.
And also what I would, just to add one more level of detail, which is Trump's pardon of NBA YoungBoy, obviously part of a long-running Trump charm offensive with young rappers, particularly young rappers in legal peril, a series of pardons, Kodak Black, among others. essentially making him the candidate of, in any number of number of hip hop contexts, so-and-so's in jail, everybody chants free so-and-so. Trump becomes the free so-and-so candidate. And his politics, by extension, become the free so-and-so politics. And whether it's Trump's idea or whether it's one of his side folks, that is Trump identifying a segment of popular culture that is hospitable to him and his ideology. And then it's that wing of popular culture essentially abandoned. You didn't see rappers out there for Kamala in 2024 outside of like the most obvious 90s centrist kind of left-leaning rappers. Young rappers said, no, we're voting for Trump. Or to the extent that we're voting, we support Trump. That is an example, I think what Joe said is correct, of cool culture embracing something that is explicitly right.
Is there a way that you see the right trying to build on its currency in popular culture right now? Like, what do Trump, NBA YoungBoy, and Sydney Sweeney have in common? Like, is that a coalition that can hold?
I mean, that might be a coalition that can hold. But then the Republican Party is also the party of boring white suburban married like that is the weird thing about the Republican Party under Trump is that it became a coalition of people fed up with progressive culture for completely different reasons, right? A culture of conservative normies and the transgressive. And so it makes sense that once your coalition is a place of transgression and the other coalition has no room for transgression, you're going to get people in culture, in art, who are pulled towards your coalition. Maybe I'm hung up again as someone sort of from an earlier era on the idea that like the way you get politics in pop culture is the sort of expression of certain pieties by a prominent movie star. And I still think we're infinitely far away from a prominent movie star saying like, I'm pro-life and I believe in limited government. The way prominent celebrities would say,
no, Sydney Sweeney is not going to.
I support the environment and no person is illegal or something, right?
I don't think anybody's going to come out for deregulation.
Right.
I don't think so.
Okay, so that's but then it's like, all right, so you have this transgressive space. How stable is that transgressive space? Does it? I think there's a scenario where that transgressive space persists but depoliticizes a little bit after Trump. So whether it's Vance or someone else, you get a kind of reversion to the Republican mean. And then you have a lot of people out there who still no longer want to identify with whatever progressivism is, want to be seen as sort of outside the lines of official liberal decency, whatever that means. But they're not going to identify with Ron DeSantis. Like in a world where Ron DeSantis or Marco Rubio or someone else like that was the Republican nominee for president, nobody's going to be like, oh, why won't Sydney Sweeney say she's voting for Ron DeSantis? And certainly no one's going to do a rap tour about Ron.
I don't know who DeSantis is going to pardon. We don't know about that. But
it isn't just the pardon. So the pardons are the transactional side, right? But Trump has always, first of all, he's always had some subset of sort of people in African American pop culture, Don King, like these kind of people who he was friendly with,
Puff
right?
Daddy.
Puff Daddy, right? Exactly.
Great story in Vibe magazine in 1997 or 1998
and
about
Trump
Donald
has
Trump.
always just had a celebrity identity. So I just don't know what the kind of sort of equivalent of that explicitly right-wing energy is after him. Now, maybe it's in, maybe there's something in religion and religious art, right? Like that makes a comeback or
one of the most beloved albums of the year, the Rosalia album Lux, which we discussed with her on this very show, is explicitly about female sainthood.
Right, but that's an example of sort of, and I think you will see more of this, a kind of non-ironic portrayals of religiosity where the goal is not the kind of Madonna, like, I am using Catholic iconography in order to subvert and deconstruct it. but sort of more I think you will see more religious sincerity in art and pop culture probably in this environment than you would have 20 years ago, which is conservative coded in some way.
Can I get back to the piety question? Because you're talking about post-Trump, you're talking about a Vance or a DeSantis, who obviously seem like potentially a reversion to more traditional conservative values and more traditional expressions of political conservatism, and presumably less appealing to edgelordy people on the internet. Despite
the
Vance
edgelords are different. So there's you do have now something that I think will persist that didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago, which is a kind of right-wing counterculture that has like its own weird little literary factions. It has, like the Dime Square scene in New York that I'm sure, no longer exists the way it did a couple years ago. But like,
you'd be surprised.
That has, all right. That had, but a world.
We still have to go out, Ross. Jeez.
Right, yeah,
we still got to go somewhere.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, but a world that looks a little bit. I mean, part of what happened in all of Western culture is that fascism and Nazi Germany sort of completely culturally discredited all forms of like edgy right-wing aesthetic stuff. I think that's
probably rightfully so.
Yeah.
I mean, Nazi, they also did other bad things, right?
Sure. Besides make art. Yeah.
Well, I mean, did it discredit? I don't know. Like, so if you go back to the 1920s and 1930s, you have a lot of like high modernist literary figures who are right-wing.
Sure.
And by the time you get to like the late 20th century Western world, it's very difficult to imagine that, right? In any serious numbers. You do have like David Bowie has like a phase of sort of right pretending to be in
playing with fascist
iconography,
there's
visual play.
If you want to say that all extremes of politics should be discredited by totalitarian evil, then you can say it's good that the Nazis discredited right-wing extremist literary figures, and it would be good if the legacy of Mao and Stalin had discredited extreme left-wing literary figures, which is not to say that I'm here to tell you, we need to, Ezra Pound was totally misunderstood for his shilling for Mussolini or something. Like, to be clear, like the fascist anti-Semitic artists were bad. But I guess I would say, like, if you're entering an era of cultural unsettlement, you should expect some kind of right-wing counterculture.
And with the right
emerge.
As this place of transgression, I'm curious what you think of the consequences insofar as they exist within the traditional spheres of major label system, Hollywood studios, et cetera. Which brings us to, sort of a relatively niche figure, but someone who is touching a lot of the things that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes, which is Dasha Nekrasova, co-host of the very popular Dime Square heterodox cultural commentary show Red Scare, also a aspiring actress, has
was in Succession,
been part of Succession,
Materialists,
Small Role Materialists, made a film of her own about Jeffrey Epstein, and has now been quote unquote canceled for hosting Nick Fuentes, the Holocaust denying white nationalist internet celebrity, on her podcast. Was reportedly dropped from a film, dropped by her agents as part of a campaign, which was reported, I believe, in the Hollywood Reporter, that there had been an individual who had long kept up with what she said and what others said on her show, and that eventually it culminated in her being stripped of these opportunities. She appeared over the weekend on Glenn Greenwald's podcast on Rumble, saying that, in fact,
it's just one podcast after another.
That's true. She would basically said, "I'm surprised this didn't happen to me earlier.
Yep.
I'm already blacklisted. It's already hard for me to find work.
I've already kind of been de facto blacklisted. And that's been made clear to me.
Interviewing Alex Jones and appearing with Steve Bannon over the years, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess that structure of pieties, of consequences from the Hollywood studios remains intact, even though, as Glenn Greenwald said in his discussion with her, they felt like these days of cancellation were over in the second Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, Fuentes has become a test case more in politics than in culture, I think.
Though
but also in culture, right?
And met Donald Trump with Kanye West.
Kanye West. Yes.
So this is something that's been percolating, I think, at the intersection of culture and politics for years now.
Yeah, but in politics, Fuentes has become the place of attempted line drawing.
Do you think like Hassan Piker and Zohran Mamdani actually want to reappropriate the wealth of like middle class white people at gunpoint?
I do, yeah.
Very, very clearly, there's a sense of like, okay, we sort of, the right opened things up and the right became kind of a menagerie of strange ideas. And right now, you can find basically any wild idea that a normal person 20 years ago would have considered insane somewhere in the right-wing ecosystem. And this has, again, as with art, it has both given the right a dynamism that I assure you it did not have when Mitt Romney was running for president, right? It is, since Trump was elected in sort of different ways, it has just become way more interesting to be engaged in right-wing political debates.
Well, the ultimate non-pious figure.
Right.
Like,
but it has also obviously like given platforms and audiences to genuinely evil people. And so with Fuentes, it's like he's the place where it's like, okay, this is a guy who doesn't cross one line. He crosses, every available line, and he is sort of straightforwardly toxic, though also has a kind of comedic performative bent.
All of which he has in common with Kanye West, which I think is interesting that someone like NBA YoungBoy, even someone like Morgan Wallen in country music, Jason Aldean, another, potentially controversial, right-leaning country singer. And those people are not only allowed
But Jason Aldean,
continue.
correct me if I'm wrong, is not saying like, I'm here to defeat world Jewry.
No, but he is.
Well, not
Kanye is, but Kanye's actual.
But that's what I'm saying. And that's the line I'm drawing, which is that much like Fuentes, Kanye was cast out. Even with the comedy, even with the decades of beloved work, that was where people drew the line. Much like Nick Fuentes, while these other strain of people that we've been discussing have been allowed to continue and even be embraced by a left-leaning audience, despite their sympathies for, ideas or people that might be seen as evil by even a large portion of their fan base.
One thing there is just that you have a more fluid cultural environment and the guardrails move or the lines move, but there is still going to be some people who are outside them. So you have people who would have been canceled 5 years ago who don't get canceled. So it's like, okay, where are the lines?
How far can we go
we're
here?
going to discover the point at which people freak out, and that point right now is Nick Fuentes. The other thing, though, is that Kanye West's career spirals down, and so does his art to some degree. I mean, I'm not I don't have really strong views on Kanye's music, so I'm just going to follow right.
Can confirm.
So that's always been part of it. Like even, you've always had figures who are sort of able to navigate even constrained political cultural environments while having outre opinions if they find a way to make art that lots of people are interested in.
Yes.
Nick Fuentes is not, you could argue his entire career is art. You could say that, right? But explicitly, he is calling for a white nationalist group or take over the Republican Party. That's what he's doing. He's a political actor. So it's not like you're like, well, I like the art from.
Right.
I hate Nick Fuentes' politics, but I love his Blue Period. Or something.
Sure.
You don't
have that.
But the other thing that I wanted to note about the Red Scare Fuentes episode is I think what happened on that interview is not radically different than what's been happening on Red Scare for many years, and the kind of dare I say, overly performed reaction to it, and the sense that this was the red line, it makes me wonder if there's an implicit handshake agreement among folks who are making conservative or conservative-leaning edgy content that it is theater first, politics second, and that all of this conversation that we're having about piety, part of being not pious is also saying we know that we're playing a game here and we're all sort of greasing each other's wheels a little bit.
I do think, though, that there's a big difference between saying offensive things to be offensive and to shock people and saying offensive things in the context of claiming to have a concrete agenda that involves a political takeover. Like someone like Fuentes, whatever the performativity is, what he is performing is highly anti-Semitic, racist broadcaster urging a particular politics of white nationalism. That is, it seems to me, quite different from, we're on this show and we want the freedom to make a racist or anti-Semitic joke. Right?
Are they not unrelated projects? In the sense that, yes, obviously someone with a more explicit focus on politics and legislation and organizing may not be functioning on the same level as someone who is trying to manipulate and convince minds in a social setting, but are they not the same project?
I think that they're related in the sense that if you have a world in which people feel more comfortable saying offensive things generally, then that world will provide openings for people who want to build a politics around racism in its varied forms. At the same time, to go back to the examples of comedians, right? Someone like Dave Chappelle built a long career sort of saying offensive things around racial issues and then became the guy who was saying offensive things around transgender issues, right? I think it would be weird for me to say Dave Chappelle and Nick Fuentes are engaged in the same project. I don't think they are. I think if you're trying to analyze what's happening in culture, you don't want to say everyone who's trying to offend is also ultimately doing the same thing as the people who want a white nationalist ethno-state.
Though
I
would say there is a direct line between offense, dehumanization, and policy. And I think that when you see political figures engaging in, J.D. Vance is sometimes a Twitter comedian at this point, in addition to being the vice president. You see that is a direct line in my mind.
That's the sweet spot for right-wing pop culture.
Yes.
Do we mean this? Do we not mean this? Is this political? Is it ideological? That's why so many of these shows are working. And that's why there's alliances between people who are on different sides of this.
But wouldn't it be I want to stay on this for a second.
Sure.
Wouldn't it be I have lived in a mostly left-wing and liberal popular culture environment for a very long time. And over the course of that lifetime, I have seen beliefs that I hold sacred, a faith that I belong to, all the rest held up for mockery and ridicule and scorn on many, many occasions, including the Sydney Sweeney movie about the Catholic Church, right? I don't think it makes sense for me to look at that stuff and just say anyone who's I want to have a lot of space to make fun of the Catholic Church and make fun of Christianity should be seen as we're all in the same project as people who want to overtly persecute Christians. If I did think that, I would have a difficult time relating to pop culture. And again, I agree that the more political the art is, the more that it's hey, we're a far-right podcast and we support Trump and we want to build the wall or whatever else. Yeah, what the further you go, the more you can say, okay, they and Nick Fuentes exist on some sort of continuum. But I also want to say we should be protective of the independence of art. The way the South Park guys approach the Catholic Church is often very funny and often presents the Catholic Church in frameworks that if you applied it to Judaism would be seen as like profoundly anti-Semitic. It's like we're joking about how the Catholic Church is a global conspiracy, to rape and molest children. That's like a South Park joke. And I can accept that. Like, this is a free society. The Catholic Church did have a problem with sex abuse. Like, I can accept that. But I don't want to say like, and we should be analyzing all comedy in terms of like its maximalist political implications or interpretations, because I think that's just a bad way to experience people making fun of things we hold dear.
I do think there's a blurry line, though, and that there are people who have a symbiotic relationship on either side of that line. I'm thinking of, I saw Shane Gillis perform in Las Vegas this year, probably the most culturally relevant thing I did all year. And
apart from this podcast.
And Tony Hinchcliffe opened for him. And Gillis did a thing where he was very, as he always does, he's very careful to be like, oh, you think I'm right? Well, actually, I'm left. Oh, you think I'm left? Well, actually, I'm right. He has this down to an art.
Pinpoint.
He's like, for everything he says, he swings both ways. And then you have Hinchcliffe come out, somebody who has openly campaigned for Donald Trump ahead of the election, most famously here in Madison Square Garden. And he's doing a much different thing than Shane Gillis is doing. But they're working together. And again, goes to these podcasters who are having friendly chats with the candidate Donald Trump ahead of the election. Like, that's a little different than Dave Chappelle just wanting to make his jokes. And I think everyone wins in that. And it sort of helps that it takes a very, very savvy consumer to be able to tell the difference between who is doing politics and who is doing, to John's point, theater.
And also that, Donald Trump being the ultimate sort of fuzzy character in this, being as at home with Aiden Ross as with Zohran Mamdani.
Like, if you look at someone like Mel Gibson, right? Mel Gibson is an incredibly talented guy who has politics extremely far outside the Hollywood mainstream.
Politics and also morals and behaviors.
And he was able to navigate that up to a point.
While he was making strong work.
Great. I mean, to my mind, Passion of the Christ and Apocalypto back to back are just as remarkable a pair of movies. And I say that like Passion of the Christ, like the people who said this movie plays with anti-Semitic tropes were right. The movie does play with anti-Semitic tropes. It's also an incredibly powerful work of art.
I'll take Goodfellas and Last Temptation as my pair over those two.
Scorsese and Gibson as parallel Catholic artist responses to
that's its
modern
own
culture.
Podcast.
Is its own
we'll come
podcast.
On your show for that one.
Okay,
but no, I think
then Gibson crossed. He was canceled, but he also was rehabilitated again because of the work. I mean,
and I think that's an interesting. I think I've long liked to say that all cancellations are cumulative, and I mean that in the sense of a lifetime of potentially small infractions of moral or behavioral things, but also in terms of the quality of your work. There's a reason people go down at a moment when their power dips,
culturally
when their cultural capital dips. I think, you refer back to the Mitt Romney era. I think Clint Eastwood is an interesting example of this. Somebody who, spoke at the RNC, was sort of pilloried and laughed at by Hollywood, pushed aside. And then as A, the politics got more extreme, and B, he had a late career renaissance creatively, was sort of welcomed back in by the left-leaning film bro contingent. He's one of our guys again, quote unquote, speaking general in the royal we. And I think that, we're even seeing baby steps towards something like that from Kanye West, who is, recently been on an apology tour, reportedly. Appeared with a notable rabbi. Yes, a rabbi who seems to want to meet with rappers, and I think that could work if it comes hand in hand with
a beautiful album,
strong music. And I think that
and this works the other way too, right? To the extent that there is any kind of right-wing cancel culture now, or sort of attempts by Trump himself or anyone else to kind of weaponize any advantage that the right has in culture. One, I think it's just not that effective, and or not that effective in the pop cultural sphere. I think even.
You mean like canceling, like trying to get Kimmel fired, or Seth Meyers?
Right, but the people it worked, to the extent that it makes any progress, it has worked against guys working in late night comedy, which is seen as sort of, a dinosaur in a dying industry.
Yes.
Stephen Colbert, his network, was not excited about what he was delivering for him.
Was able to say, look at all the money we're losing.
Right. Whereas South Park can make fun of Donald Trump till the cows come home.
Because it's bringing subscribers to Paramount Plus.
And no one in the White House is like, oh, I bet if we brought the hammer down, we could get those South Park guys off the air.
Yeah.
Right.
To your point about South Park and how they're able to get away with everything they do because they're winning so handily, I do wonder if part of the thing that is holding back more conservative pop culture in the mainstream is the fact that there's just less talent on the bench. You have Donald Trump this year attempting to assert himself in cultural institutions. We alluded to this idea that he's going to make Paramount/Warner Brothers remake Rush Hour. He also took over the Kennedy Center and wants to make, the honors thing something more aligned with his taste,
neoclassical architecture, and George Strait.
But yeah, and then you end up with George Strait, and then
a great American artist, just for the record. Sorry,
but then very quickly down from George Strait, you have Kiss. Or Gloria Gaynor, people who maybe don't have the bona fides that some left-leaning celebrities do. And we're seeing this again. I think this is all going to come to a head early next year at the Super Bowl. You have Bad Bunny scheduled to perform. Bad Bunny, a Puerto Rican rapper and singer who has been open,
very vocal
about his political beliefs, says he isn't touring in America for fear of ICE raids on his fans or collaborators. And he's like, but the one US show I'm going to play is going to be the biggest stage available. On the flip side, you have Turning Point USA saying, well, if that's the guy who you're going to put up there, somebody who's going to, potentially make an anti-Trump statement on this large stage, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to plan our own show. We're going to counter program. And then the question is, who do you have that can stand up next to Bad Bunny? So, I guess I wonder if it's possible to compete on that level if you just don't have
and the answer is no. In a fragmented culture with sort of the centers of cultural power weakening, you're creating an environment where there's going to be a lot of artists who have unusual political brands, no political brands at all. Maybe at some point you'll get a set of important cultural figures who are conservative coded. But it's like, for that to happen, the wheel would have to turn, I think.
It's a long journey.
A few more times. Well, and art, like all these things, it's still institutional, right? Like, yes, you can be sort of a self-created figure on the internet, and that
can get you so far.
That can get you so far. But I still think the institutions themselves would have to be transformed before you had a lot of celebrities who wanted to take the risk of being fully identified with conservatism.
Or what if there were alternate institutions? Like, I've thought about this Turning Point USA question, alternate halftime show, quite a bit. What if they're calling Morgan Wallen? Now, we don't 100% know Morgan Wallen's politics. We know, obviously, he had to go through a cancellation for using a racial slur.
Why would you want to be seen as the guy I
who's
guess,
doing the lesser thing?
I guess in the end, like the right wins culturally if the Super Bowl exists and it becomes normal to have an artist playing halftime who's known for having conservative politics. I feel like if you're the artist and you're doing the anti-Super Bowl halftime show, you are establishing that one, you're sort of you're marginalizing yourself, and two, you are pushing the world where you actually get to play the halftime show further out. So if I was like advising any really prominent singer celebrity who had vaguely right of center politics, I'd be like, do not do do not do the show that is organized to protest the Super Bowl halftime show.
John, before your counterpoint,
Okay.
we got to feed Ross a snack.
We do have to
before
feed
he
Ross
gets
and I.
back on the
We've
road.
extracted maximum cultural value.
So much content.
But yes, show this. Okay, I bought this snack. It's Thanksgiving week.
It is Thanksgiving week.
It is. We're thankful.
It will probably
we're
be
thankful for this
after
conversation.
Thanksgiving by the time you see this.
Yes, but it is Thanksgiving week.
But we'd be remiss if we did not make you eat a snack with us. Every episode of Popcast ends with a snack test. This is Keogh's Grown with Love in Ireland potato chips.
Are you up on this brand?
No. In
I've had
roast
this
turkey
brand.
and secret stuffing flavor.
You're up on this brand, Ross?
No, these
Okay.
are Irish potatoes, so it's like
The real.
famine is over. We're making potato chips.
We're making
Okay.
millions.
So, John, before you make the point that
Yes.
Morgan Wallen should play
I didn't
an
say should.
alternative halftime show, could viably play an alternative
I'm simply
halftime
saying
show.
a
Let's
Joe
have a chip.
Rogan comedy set and a Morgan Wallen music set as an alternative.
Nobody would be
halftime.
watching by the end of the Joe Rogan comedy set. He's a great podcaster, not a great comedian.
Shane Gillis.
Shane Gillis. Shane would never do it.
Shane would never
Shane would
do
never
it.
do
And
it.
that I think is
This
a
is why
crucial
Shane
point.
Gillis is a poet, respectfully.
Well, no, and this is when you were saying like Shane Gillis is moving back and forth, and you can't tell if he's right or left, and that's art. I mean, this is my actual fundamental belief is that when great art interacts with politics, not always. You can have great art that's sort of like agitprop, that's real, but ideally, you shouldn't be able to fully tell what
Should be
the
open for
artist's view,
interpretation.
because reality, the artist is trying to capture reality, and in fact, reality has components that vindicate the left and components that vindicate the right. I'm sure Shane Gillis voted for Trump.
You are.
Yeah,
I'm
don't
not.
you think?
I'm not
No,
even.
You're not.
No,
Really? Okay.
absolutely not.
All right, I'm not.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, and
right,
I am not sure. Okay, I take back the Joe Rogan thing. What if it's a Kill Tony session followed by a Wallen show?
That's a popular YouTube video,
I think
but I
that
don't
does-
know if it's
I think it does
a
millions.
Super Bowl competitor.
I think it does millions.
But does it do tens of millions or hundreds
I think
of millions?
in order to prove the point it would need to prove, it would do significant enough numbers. I do think that. If Puppy Bowl does numbers, I think that
But I
would
think
do
Ross's
numbers.
point about marginalization, again, I'm not saying they should or shouldn't one way or the other, but I just think in terms of if you want to play on the biggest stage, you have to play on the biggest stage.
Don't these just
These do
taste
not
like
taste like
barbecue?
Thanksgiving.
Don't they just taste like
Stages
barbecue?
change.
This is just a
Tastes like barbecue
salty chip.
This isn't barbecue.
It's just an extremely salty chip.
This company does a flavor, I want to say it's like sour cream and shamrock.
What is
hungry.
shamrock flavor?
Who the hell knows, dog? But I enjoy that flavor. This is
A great sturdy potato chip. I'm into
No,
these
it's good,
Irish
it's good,
potatoes, but
if you handed this to me without
Yeah,
the bag,
I
I would
don't-
say this is a take on barbecue.
I don't
Yeah.
taste Thanksgiving in this at all. It's a fine chip, but based on the advertising, this is like a 2 out of 10 because this is such a letdown.
but as a chip without, what if to Ross's point, if you handed it cold?
It's a little salty. I'm going to say like maybe a 6 out of 10. Again, a great potato chip.
So sturdy.
But I don't like the flavor at all, really. Especially.
Yeah, I'm not a barbecue guy.
Expecting.
So
Where
I
are
would
you on this?
I would give it. I would say 5 and 2. Like a fine barbecue chip that I would probably not buy and not selling me on Thanksgiving. I don't feel
No.
festive
I'm let down.
after eating it.
What about after talking to us? So
I mean, career ending, whatever it may be.
For us or us, yeah.
You guys will never be cast on Succession again after having me on.
Okay, I want to be this for me. The sturdiness of the chip, the richness of the potato is trumping. No pun. The ambiguity of the flavor.
Okay.
I'm gonna say 6.5. It's. I would not reject. I will finish this bag.
Okay.
But also, I haven't eaten.
Right.
It's early in the day. I haven't eaten. I'm gonna say 6.5. And I think that we can all agree, even if we don't always agree on our political valences or our cultural products, that this chip could do more.
Yes. we're in alignment.
Yeah.
Ross, thank you so much for being here. That's our show. Every episode of Popcast is at youtube.com/Popcast, nytimes.com/Popcast. Find us on TikTok, Instagram, anywhere else you might want to find us at Popcast. Credits and link in bio. We will be back next week.